Good morning. My name is Rachael Flett, and in the following presentation, I will be critiquing a lesson plan specified for Year 4 students studying science. Before I begin the presentation, I would like to make an acknowledgement of country. I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I present on today and the Noongar campus of James Cook University. I pay my respects to the traditional Yindinji owners and elders, past and present, of the land in which we stand. The following lesson plan that I have chosen is exploring how Indigenous peoples of the world use natural materials. The topic focuses on Year 4 students building a better understanding of materials and the surrounding Indigenous peoples and the world. As I critique this lesson plan, I discuss the use of resources that are provided, specifically the slideshow. The slideshow creates a relaxed environment for easy and open discussion on natural materials from all over the world. A worksheet is provided as a way for students to easily take notes to then use for future research and discussion. This lesson plan centers around the Year 4 content description. Natural and processed materials have a range of physical properties that can influence their use. Considering how Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples use natural and processed materials for different purposes, such as tools, clothing, and shelter, based on their properties. The slideshow provides pictures of homes, clothes, tools, and jewellery to encourage discussion among the students by asking what materials were used and why. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be any written consent for the use of these photos, some even including people. It is understandable that majority of these images are from other countries, but for images using Australian Indigenous peoples, I would be seeking advice from Indigenous locals. By seeking advice and input in the matter, you are showing the students that you are taking responsibility, especially as this lesson is targeted towards Year 4 students. At the beginning of the lesson, it clearly states the expectations for the students to have achieved by the end of the lesson. It says, students will recognize the Aboriginal peoples and Torres Strait Islander peoples' knowledge of the physical properties of materials to select and combine materials for a purpose. To the left-hand side, lesson concepts are provided, giving a brief overview of what teachers should be looking out for when observing the class, such as making sure students understand that there is a difference between natural and processed materials. They also suggest to pay attention to students when handling the materials to make sure they are safe and respectful. At the beginning of the lesson plan, some strengths would include that this is an opportunity for non-Indigenous students and Indigenous students to analyze and discuss the materials and their use. This can also be done in a group to then later be discussed as a whole class. This is a great moment for the students and teacher to acknowledge the seriousness of our land's history and can provide a moment to respect and reconsider the topic of the subject. By continuing to pull the students back to the idea that material isn't just fabric, they can freely discuss the natural material that were used by the Indigenous peoples. However, some weaknesses could include that I didn't see a suggestion for acknowledging the land that they stand on or acknowledging the land which they are about to discuss and research. By using the physical materials for the students to work with, may work well to form an understanding of how they use these materials, but without caution, these could veer into a means of arts and crafts instead of research, and the students could mistreat these materials. The slideshow that is provided doesn't seem to reassure the user that the photos were used with permission. I would consider including the local Indigenous peoples to have a chance to share their own stories, therefore never sharing stories that are not mine to share. I would also encourage students to connect with family members and encourage said family members to visit the class to talk about their history. This could be inclusive to all cultures and Indigenous people in the class. Seeking permission for the photos used in the slideshow is important to ensure I am not disrespecting my students and their families. Some more strengths would include that next steps and learning alerts are included in the lesson plan. This is a great and easy way for teachers to be forewarned of any negative outcomes that could come from the lessons. Making it known that the world is full of Indigenous peoples, all with different cultures, is just as important as learning about our Australian Indigenous peoples. Also, providing a way for the students to discuss freely of any ideas and questions about the history of the land on which they stand provides comfort and a safe place for learning. Some weaknesses, however, would include that it is important to note that some Indigenous students may feel uncomfortable discussing their culture and family without any warning. Some overall changes could be that creating a safe and trusting environment is incredibly important, especially with 9 to 10-year-olds with a potentially sensitive topic. Acknowledging that even though we may be only discussing materials, we may mention sensitive history for children. I would make it very clear at the start of the lesson, even prior to, what we will be viewing and discussing. It is very common that before TV shows, movies, websites, and books will provide disclaimers stating that deceased people may cause offense and unrest to viewers. So continuing this is showing respect to my students and any visitors that enter a classroom. A resource that I would add to the current lesson plan is this group activity that's seen to the right that can use the already sourced nature materials. This could be used for the end of the lesson as a fun way to appreciate the beauty of the land that they stand on. This is a subtle way for the students to discuss what they learned in the class from discussions and any images they saw on the slideshow. Due to the lengthy lesson, this could be done as a modification to the other activities supplied in the lesson plan, or could be done at the end of the week as a closure to the subject. For the entirety of the lesson plan, some overall thoughts and changes could be that, most importantly, seeking permission for local photos, stories, and material is important, as it shows respect and honesty towards the community and the students. The environment that the teacher creates is just as important as the content. Making sure the students are aware of the content and any sensitive content shows respect. This lesson plan reminds teachers to keep students' thoughts in check when understanding what materials are, and that the world, let alone Australia, wouldn't be where it is without the brilliance of the Indigenous peoples. My name is Rachael Flett, and thank you for listening to my lesson plan critique for ED2991.